Hello and welcome to Trusts and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Monday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific. That's 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And we talk about all things related to estate planning, probate, trusts, estates, as the name might indicate, both from the standpoint of your personal financial planning, as well as from the position of those seeking to assist in estate planning and trust and probate and estate services. So either for people already involved in that or who are in a profession that they could extend their business into this area and do some more good for their clients. So this morning, I'm going to talk about trust companies and professional fiduciaries and the sort of the benefits and limitations of each of them. These are the two most common types of trustees, or for that matter, executors or administrators outside of somebody appointing an individual. And in talking to other people I know who are involved in this area, one of the things we discussed is how much more complicated it is nowadays than it was even 20 or 30 years ago. So, someone acting as a trustee, I'm just going to use the word trustee kind of as in a general sense, could really be an executor or an administrator, or for that matter, really even a conservator or a guardian. But someone acting in that position these days is bound by a very high standard of care, such that even if they make an honest mistake, that may still constitute a breach of their duty. And so, the times when perhaps an elderly spouse might administrate their family living trust, or might serve as an executor for an estate, something like that, or where a child would. That may not be a good idea anymore, especially if that person doesn't have a reasonably high level of financial sophistication, as well as the ability to understand and appreciate the various legal issues, such that they're getting proper guidance in fulfilling that role. And so that's part of the reason why here in California, there is now a licensed profession known as a professional fiduciary, and other states require various levels of qualifications for individuals to hold those roles. And of course, there have been trust companies for a long, long time who have also held that role. So I'm going to, as I often do, share my screen. I prepared a little PowerPoint here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so you all know our show, Trust and Estates Weekly, and this is the 3 pillars of attainment, which is, of course, the basis for everything we do on the Way to Wow shows. Ooh, wow, that was weird. We're dealing primarily here in the finances realm of the pursuits pillar. However, relationships often are a big part of estate planning and dealing with trusts and estates, unavoidably so. All right, so first of all, I want to start out by talking about what are these two types of trustees. So I spoke a little bit about a professional fiduciary. Okay, so a professional fiduciary is an individual, and that's a natural person individual, as opposed to a corporation is a legal person, and in that sense, it's an individual, but it's not a natural person. Okay, so in this case, we're talking about a flesh and blood human being, okay, like me, okay, they are licensed or certified. And you know what? I'm going to close out of this sharing and bring up actually another image. Let me find it here real quickly. I should have had this up. Okay. All right, here we go. So let me share again. Share screen. Okay, here we go. All right, so this is an image off of the website for the CGC. Okay, CDC is the Center for Guardianship Certification, I believe. Okay, they're actually more concerned with conservatorships and guardianships. And this shows you, this is a map, of course, of the United States, and it shows you it's mostly here in the West that there are rules about who can practice and who cannot. Okay, so you'll notice California is the only one in this sort of blue color. That's because California has a state licensing and certification regime. Okay, and that's what I am. I'm a licensed California professional fiduciary. Okay, so in Washington, Arizona, Texas, and Florida, notice they're in this red regime. Okay, so they have a state administered registration, certification, and licensing program. However, it's for conservators and guardians. So to be a trustee or an executor or something like that, at least in my reading of the rules for those 4 states, you don't need to have a certification or license. Okay, whereas in California, to fill any of those roles, well, you can fill one without being licensed, but any more than one and at a time, and you have to be licensed. Okay, then you'll notice these states in the sort of gold color. Okay, so in this case, CGC certification is required. So that's a certification through the Center for Guardianship Certification. And again, it's necessary to be a conservator or a guardian. It's again, my read is you don't need to have that CGC certification to be a trustee, especially since the CGC has nothing to do with trusteeship. Okay, and you'll notice here I have certain ones checked and certain ones with a 0 and certain ones with an X. So this is respect to the states that I practice in. So the ones where there's an X, and there's I think 3 of them here, these are states that they have requirements that for one reason or another I don't want to meet, and so I don't practice in those states. The states where there's check marks, I meet those requirements already, and the states where there's zeros, there it means I'm open to fulfilling their requirements. I just haven't done it yet. And then you'll notice most of the rest of the United States has no requirements at all. So I was speaking to a friend in New York the other day who is an accountant. Who's not an accountant. She's a financial services professional looking to expand her business. And I suggested to her that she might consider acting as a professional fiduciary. There are no licensing requirements in California in New York to do that. Okay, so this gives you an idea of sort of the patchwork, and it is a state by state thing for professional fiduciaries. There is no such thing as a nationally certified or licensed professional fiduciary. Okay, and you can see, so I've been talking about this category here, professional fiduciary, but also lawyers and accountants oftentimes will fill these roles. So these are the 3 most common, in addition to, like I said, individuals like a family member. Okay, so that's a professional fiduciary. A trust company then is a company. It can either be specifically formed in order to act as a fiduciary, or it could be a part of a bank, and that bank could be state chartered, it could be nationally chartered, it could even be a foreign bank that is permitted to do business here in the United States. And they have what are usually, they're not called trust companies, they're usually called trust departments, but they in fact act as what would amount to a trust company. Okay, so it's in essence, a financial institution. Even an independent trust company that isn't connected with a bank is essentially a financial institution. You'll see what I mean in a minute. And it's authorized to act as a fiduciary, okay? And it's typically a large multi-person firm, okay? So I'm gonna show you here in California, here it is. So the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation is the state department that oversees trust companies. And I'm going to go back. Here's one. Oops. Two, actually. Here you go. Okay, so trust companies and departments. See, they basically fall under the same category here. Okay, and they're actually essentially licensed through the Department of Corporations and Financial Institutions, right? Hence why they are generally considered to be financial institutions, even if they're an independent company, okay? And they're regulated state by state. Now, there are national trust companies, and they're regulated by the comptroller of the currency and are thus essentially able to provide trust services nationally across state lines, okay? But in any event, they're going to be they're closely regulated companies, okay, as opposed to an individual. All right, so let's go back to our PowerPoint. We're doing well on time. Okay, so basically, I think the easiest way to think of them is a professional fiduciary is an individual, a trust company is a company, but they've both been in some way authorized to act as a fiduciary, either formally because they're licensed or certified in some way, although as you saw, a lot of states don't require formal certification per se, but if for someone acting in that position and calling themselves a professional fiduciary, if they practice incompetently, I think we can be pretty sure that even in a state without a licensing regime or a certification regime, the Attorney General is going to come after them, right? Because they're abusing people's trust. All right. And lawyers and accountants, by virtue of being licensed in those professions, gives them the ability to be professional fiduciaries. All right, so let's look at the benefits now of the two. So for a professional fiduciary, generally speaking, they're going to have more personalized attention. Okay, so when I talk to prospective clients, that is one of the things that I emphasize, because I've always, even in my prior life in real estate, I had a very client-focused business. So I looked at, what do my clients need to accomplish? How can I aid them in doing that? Now, sometimes that meant me performing services for them. Sometimes that meant me bringing in someone else or referring them to someone else who had the specific expertise that they needed, okay? And because of that, I don't know why this does this. And I have a lot of flexibility in how I can set up a program to serve a particular client. And that's, again, generally true of professional fiduciaries as well, because professional fiduciaries, even large active ones, are not as large as trust companies. They, generally speaking, have lower fees, okay? And typically their fees will be calculated either on a percentage of assets under administration. That's usually what they'll call it, as opposed to assets under management, which is more of a securities term. So you'll hear assets under administration, AUA, okay? They may charge a percentage, or they may charge, an hourly rate, or in some cases, even a fixed monthly rate, if their duties are pretty standard and don't vary very much from month to month. Okay. Now, a trust company is a more comprehensive in-house, or has typically more comprehensive in-house expertise. So whereas a professional fiduciary is probably not going to perform what is it called? In investment advising. A trust company oftentimes will have in-house investment advisory people. They'll have in-house resources. They may even have the ability to execute purchases of mutual funds and ETFs or whatever. Or they may do it through an affiliate of their bank if they're a trust department in a bank. Okay. And the other thing that is a benefit of trust companies is continuity. So if the professional fiduciary were to die, okay, there needs to be a plan in place for who's going to take over from that person. Now, by the way, there could be more than one professional fiduciary working together. And in that case, there may be a plan that if one professional fiduciary dies or retires, okay, so one of his partners will be substituted in, and there'll be a relatively smooth transition since they work in the same firm and they know each other's clients. In the case of a trust company, while there could be an individual in the trust company that's acting as the trustee, the trust company itself can also be the trustee. And so in that case, since it's a corporation, it doesn't die. And so there's no worry. People can join the company, leave the company. It doesn't make any difference in the sense of continuity. Okay, so that is one of the benefits of a trust company. Okay, I would say that the continuity is more. I mean, it's a built-in factor, I guess is the best way to put it. Whereas with a professional fiduciary, it needs to be considered and actively made sure that that issue is dealt with. Okay, so those are the benefits. Now let's talk about the limitations. Okay, for the professional fiduciary, depending the experience of the professional fiduciary is going to be limited by whoever the professional fiduciary is. So if that person is relatively new to the profession, they may have limited experience. Okay. Now, again, if there's more than one professional fiduciary working together in a practice, so together they may have a lot of experience. Now, for myself, I've been in business since my own business since 1986, right? So that's going close to 40 years now. And I've had a lot of experience in managing and all that kind of stuff. Okay, but I'm kind of an older guy. So, someone younger may not have the breadth or depth of experience that others may have. So that's something that needs to be investigated if you're thinking about working with a professional fiduciary. Okay. Next limitation, because they don't typically have a high level of in-house expertise and resources, they're going to be reliant on outside expertise and resources. So in my case, I don't have, I should say, in-house investment advisory. Okay, so to the extent that a client needs that service, I'm going to engage another professional. All right, and I don't have in-house counsel either. So in the way a typical professional fiduciary works is we work as a team with other professionals to make sure that the client is properly served. Okay, so rather than having everyone as part of our organizations like I said, we create a team. Oftentimes we may be the kind of the team captain. Other times the lawyer or the accountant may be the team captain, and we're, more so kind of one of the players. Okay, so, but in any event, it's going to be that kind of situation reliant on outside expertise and resources. Finally, professional fiduciaries can have potential conflicts of interest. And so that's something that needs to be looked at carefully. So sometimes professional fiduciaries provide other services. So in my case, I'm also a licensed real estate salesperson. I have a life insurance license. I have several security licenses. So I have to be careful about the services that I provide to make sure that I'm not creating any potential conflicts of interest, and making sure that I disclose any to a potential client, if to make sure, or to be assured whether they do or do not exist, and then to make sure that they're handled properly. And that's true of other professional fiduciaries as well. Okay, and there could be even business interests. So I have various business partners. So if one of them asked me to be let's say a trustee for their trust, it's not that I can't do it. It's that we would need to recognize any potential conflicts of interest and make sure that they're properly handled. All right, so with a trust company, one of their limitations is they tend to be less personalized. They tend to give less personalized attention and flexibility. Like any larger organization, okay, especially if you're talking about a large national trust company, all right, they typically have a lot of controls in place, and to modify those controls for individual clients can sometimes be difficult at best. Okay, so they're less likely to do that. Now, there are smaller trust companies that can provide personalized attention and flexibility. Okay, but also because of how they're regulated, so they do have to be careful. Okay, so there may be certain things that they'll be less likely to want to do, just because they don't want to skirt, the edges of the regulatory regime. So, again, that's something to talk to a trust company, or if you're looking for a trustee or someone to act in the fiduciary capacity, as you talk to trust companies, that's an important issue to discuss with them. What kind of personalized attention and flexibility are you going to get? Now, the next one sort of is related to this, and that is the turnover of personnel. So in a trust company, because it's typically a larger organization, people come and go. So, a person handling a particular account, they may be there a few years and then they move on, or they may get promoted and they're no longer doing frontline account services, that sort of thing. So they may still be in the company, but they're not going to be the person that someone deals with, a beneficiary, for example, deals with on a day-to-day basis any longer. Okay, whereas with a professional fiduciary, that person is that person is the fiduciary. So that person's going to be there. Okay, and then the other limitation on trust companies is they tend to have higher fees. So it's not unusual for a trust company to charge between 0.25% and 2% of assets under administration as their fee. So, for example, if they're managing a $20 million trust, okay, maybe they're charging, let's say, even 0.5%. That's roughly, let me make sure I'm doing this right. Let's see, 1% of 20 million No, I'm sorry, they're going to charge more than that. So they're going to charge probably about 1%, I suspect, of 20 million assets. That's $200,000 a year. In fact, they may even charge a little more than that. They might charge, 1.5%. So it could be $300,000 a year to manage, a trust with those kind of assets. All right. So that is, again, another issue to consider is, what is the fee structure? How is that going to impact the performance of the assets in the trust? Okay, well, I think we're doing all right. All right, so which one is right for you? That is not a question that I'm answering today. Okay, I'm giving you some basic information. This is not, legal advice, financial advice, anything like that. It's making you aware of issues. So as you decide or as you work on making a decision as to which is right for you, I recommend considering these 4 points. First of all, what are your individual needs, especially as they connect with the various benefits and limitations of the two? Okay. Next is what is your preferred manner of working? Okay, so do you like a lot of flexibility? Do you bristle when being told that's not in our policy, we can't do that, right? If those kinds of, if those are going to be issues for you, then a professional fiduciary that offers you more flexibility may be a better choice than a trust company. Okay. Now, I should hasten to add that professional fiduciaries tend to not work in the very high end of trusts and in the very complex trusts. Once you get into kind of 9-figure trusts, in that case, you probably are going to be dealing with a trust company. Okay. So that gets back to individual needs. What is the size of the trust, et cetera? Although I can imagine there are some sophisticated fiduciaries out there, lawyers, et cetera, who are trustees on large trusts. Okay, so how do you like to work, and how can that be best accommodated between a professional fiduciary and a trust company? Next, what pre-existing relationships do you have? So do you already have a relationship with a lawyer, and so you have no need for in-house counsel? Do you already have an investment advisor that you work with, and so you have no need for an in-house investment advisor? Well, and if you value those pre-existing relationships, so that might kind of push you in one direction. If you don't have those pre-existing relationships and you like the idea of it all kind of being in-house, so then that might push you in the direction of a trust company. Okay, so again, it all gets back to what your individual needs are. Okay, and then finally, what is your budget? What can the trust or the estate that you're dealing with sustain in terms of fees in order for it to be managed well? Okay, and especially as you move into smaller and smaller ones, it can get harder and harder to afford a trust company. Okay, so if you've got a $2 or $3 million trust, okay, where you might say, well, gosh, 2% of $2 million is let's see, 2,200,000, 20,000. That'd be about $40,000 a year. Okay, I hope I'm doing the math right on that. 2 million. 10% would be 200,000, 1% would be 20,000. Yeah, $40,000 a year to manage that $2 million trust. That's pretty high, okay? But that's probably what a trust company is going to need to charge, and maybe even more, to manage the trust properly within their systems, okay? So think about your budget. What can you afford that's not going to so substantially take money out of the funds generated by the trust that the managers are getting all the money, or the fiduciary is getting all the money, and there's nothing left for the assets to grow or to pay over to the beneficiaries. Okay, so that is the difference between a professional fiduciary and a trust company. And if you need help, here's some places to do so. This will also be in the show notes. You have my email address, various social media outlets. Feel free to post a question, especially if it's a general question. If you have something specific to your own situation, especially if it's something that you want to be private, so then please don't post that publicly. Feel free to send me an email, although don't include private financial information or anything like that. If there's anything that needs to be looked at in that regard, we'll arrange to have it transferred in a way that protects the integrity of the data. Okay, but in any event, please do feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm happy to help you. Okay, here's the legal stuff as always. Blink. There we go. Stop our sharing. So that's our show for today. Pretty straightforward in the sense of what these are and how they work. Not at all straightforward in determining which would be best for you. That is, as in all of these things, is really an individual decision, and something that has to be looked at very carefully before deciding. So thanks very much for joining me. I want to mention that tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific time is Business Lessons from the Military. We're going to be continuing our discussion of how to use intelligence doctrine in Marine Corps warfighting doctrine in a business setting. Okay, it's interesting topic, I think you'll find. So we're going to be moving on to the next part of that. And then on Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time is People Making Money. And our topic this week are tax breaks for 2023. So it's already, the middle of November. And there are some strategies that you might want to discuss with your accountant or your tax preparer, getting ready, to file your taxes for this year. Of course, you don't have to file them until next year, the deadline next year. Nonetheless, there are certain things that you may want to take a look at now, and especially if you prepare your own taxes. So you may not have anyone kind of pinging you and saying, hey, have you looked at these things? It's we're heading toward year end, so it's time to give some thought to that. So that'll be on Wednesday, again, 12:30 p.m. Those are all Pacific times. So thanks again for joining me here at the beginning of the week, Monday, for Trust and Estates Weekly. I appreciate it. And if you know of someone who's dealing with these issues, do them a favor. Maybe send them a link to the show list so they can see the different episodes that are available, and that might help them. Maybe suggest that they subscribe to our YouTube channel so they can always be notified when a new show posts. So again, thank you very, very much for joining me. Look forward to seeing you again later this week, and signing off.